All right, welcome everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. And thanks for joining us at this Allen & Heath webinar. My name is Nic Beretta. I'm head of product at Allen & Heath, and I'm joined today by my colleague Val Gilbert, who is sitting behind the scenes monitoring your questions. So please send in any question you might have throughout the webinar using the Q&A button in the Zoom webinar interface. And we will do our very best to pick up as many questions as we can towards the end of the session. Right, so let's begin. Great to see so many of you here. And you might have spotted a post on LinkedIn last week about the plural of matrix. So what's that about? That was just to whet your appetite. And in fact, as we were preparing for the launch, little we knew that Warner Bros. Was about to release the latest installment of their Matrix saga. So if you're a fan of the Matrix films, this next slide is probably for you. You can take the blue pill and return to your current fixed format 48 kilohertz DSP, blissfully unaware of AHM, or you can take the red pill and keep watching this webinar to rethink the Matrix with us and learn more about this new breed of matrix processors based on 96 kilohertz FPGA technology. And you probably heard of this FPGA processing and the XCVI core in relation to our live mixers. And in fact, this is what most people visualize when they think of Allen & Heath, a mixing console at a live event or in a venue. And that's for sure a big part of what we do. But actually, we've been also designing dedicated installation products for over 20 years. The IDR matrix processors are still today at the heart of the audio systems of global banks, government facilities, stadiums, universities. And more recently, of course, we launched AHM-16 at ISC 2020 back in those days where trade shows were still a thing. People were still shaking hands, or just about, because the pandemic was about to start and unfortunately hit our industry very hard. But we were so pleased to see AHM-16 installed in a huge variety of places in the last couple of years, from our theme park in Denmark to a global media network which deployed AHM-16s in several locations across Europe and Asia, with an office in Hong Kong controlling AHM-16 units across Asia over the internet, which was really cool to see. And here is a selection of some other places where AHM-16 has been installed more recently. Several churches in both the UK and US, including the Gloucester Cathedral, the BIC Conference Center and multi-purpose venue in Germany. Bottom left is the Sennheiser demo room in Denmark, which is using AHM-16 to control all of their speaker demos and microphone demos, microphone arrays, including with the echo cancelling module for video conferencing in the same room. And then again, audio distribution for Finger Lakes Opera, Barber of Seville, as you can see bottom right, showing how versatile AHM is, in this case feeding different speaker stacks and different areas of the show in front and behind the stage. And a similar role, but in a permanent setup this time, for the Muni Theatre in St. Louis, the top left picture. That's a venue with 11,000 seats, open air, as you can see. And check out the pictures of the rack with not one, but two AHM-16s that we published with a story on our website and social media channels. It's one of my favorite AHM-16 racks so far. And through these installations and a lot more, I've been talking to a lot of integrators and consultants, and we gathered a lot of feedback about the features of the AHM system and how to develop the software further, But in particular, a lot of the feedback was about the need for smaller matrix processors to cater for smaller installations and smaller spaces. And that's why we invested a lot of time and resources in expanding the family. And here you can see the 3 models now in the line, AHM16, 32, and 64. So without further ado, let's recap a minute on AHM64, and then we'll see what the new models bring to the table. So AHM64 is a 64 by 64 internal processing matrix. And when I say processing matrix, what I mean is that all of those 64 input and output channels have full processing on board. On top of that matrix, you can freely patch hundreds of system inputs and outputs, analog to digital, in any format or sample rate through what we call the tie line feature of AHM. But the processing itself is limited to 64 input channels and 64 zones or output channels. And we will talk a little bit more about that later in the webinar. On the back panel, more interestingly for us, you can find the local analog I/O, so 12 by 12, 12 in, 12 out on Phoenix connectors, the I/O port for further expansion, so you can fit that with a DANTE card or other options that we will explore in a second, and the built-in S-Link port for audio expansion through our Everything I/O system of modular rack wall mount expanders in any combination. And then the DC backup power supply, so the AHM64 can be used as part of an AVAC system or for voice alarm applications. And there's also a 2x2 GPIO interface built into the unit. And if you need more, again, we'll talk about extra options for networkable GPIO. But 2x2 is certainly enough for your alarm override, contact closure type of applications. Right, so new to the range are the AHM16 and 32, with a 16 by 16 and 32 by 32 processing matrix, respectively. If we start with the AHM32, you can see there's still 12 by 12 analog I/O on Phoenix connectors on board. So we didn't really sacrifice on the number of local I/O available on the unit. You still have your I/O port for expansion. There isn't a built-in S-Link port in this case, but you can fit an S-Link card to the I/O port. So you can choose to go the S-Link route if you want to make use of all of our expanders with our proprietary control transport protocols, or you can fit a DANTE card or rather to work with third-party gear. You still have the 2x2 GPIO on board. And as with the AHM64, there is an optional echo cancelling module which you can fit inside the unit for echo cancelling applications, giving you 12 channels of AC. So the AHM32 can still be used for multi-room installations in a lot of different places, hospitality, conference centers, schools, campuses, and so on. Whereas the AHM16 with a 16 by 16 matrix is probably more suited for single room applications or smaller multi-room environments, bars, restaurants, shops, and we will see a couple of examples later. In this case, on the AHM16, you get 8 by 8 local analog I/O. You still get your I/O port for expansion, 2x2 GPIO, and of course the network port for control. Right, so one of the key differences compared to the AHM64 is that we decided to build in some controls and an LCD screen within the unit. And that again comes from feedback from integrators and installers. And a lot of them really said, well, in smaller applications, in smaller environments, there isn't very often the budget, or we don't want to go to the complexity of adding extra gear, of adding further equipment. So a lot of the times, all we need to do is to change a preset or to change the background music for the room. And we want to be able to do that from the unit itself. So that's why we implemented these controls on the front panel with programmable Softkeys, so user assignable Softkeys, which you can use for a number of functions, from very simple level control of an input or a zone output in combination with the arrow keys and the LCD display, or you can assign maybe another soft key to a preset selection. So changing the room configuration from a meeting to an event or a presentation, or again, background music source selection of different sources. Again, all of this control is built into the unit with 8 soft keys on the AHM-32 and 4 soft keys on the AHM-16. Now let's have a look at some of the audio networking cards which are available in the range. As I said, you can fit a DANTE card that gives you 64 by 64 channels of DANTE, switchable 48 or 96 kilohertz sample rate, compatible with AS67, and ready to work with DANTE Domain Manager as well. There is also a Waves option card, which might be less common, less typical in installations. However, we had requests, for example, from courtrooms or other legal environments where there is a need for multi-track recording of individual microphone sources, and Waves could well be an option. Or in some cases, you might find that an installer has got a particular plugin in mind that they want to use for processing, for external processing. Again, Waves can give you that option too. As I said, the S-Link card is the easiest way for AHM-16 and 32 to link into our range of expanders in any shape and size, and also to link to another AHM unit if you want a larger system, or to link to one of our live mixers. So SQ, Avantis, D-Live can all take an S-Link connection or a GigaS connection and exchange a high number of channels through that link. And finally, the MADI card that we developed for our SQ mixers and will also be compatible with the AHM range. So all of these cards will be compatible with any of the AHM products, starting with System Manager 1.2, which we will be releasing shortly. So again, MADI can be used for a connection to a broadcast facility or a streaming studio or a streaming room alongside your main installation. Cool. Now a quick look at the processing tools that we have available in the AHM processors. And straight away, you can see that with AHM-16 and 32, we are offering exactly the same amount of channel processing that we have available in the AHM-64. So again, we didn't sacrifice, we didn't compromise on the channel processing aspects of the processors. So same 8-band parametric EQ dynamics delay on every input channel and on every zone output as well. And on top of that, you can also reserve some processing outputs for speaker processing. So you can choose to have 2 3-way crossover filter, mono stereo with delays, limiters, level, polarity, and a graphic or parametric EQ for each crossover output. On top of that, you get extra functions like priority input for each zone, ambient noise compensation for each zone, automatic mic mixers that you can use in one or multiple rooms at the same time. So lots of features across the 3 models, and the System Manager software is shared across the 3 models. All of them come with an event scheduler with the same amount of preset management tools and with a built-in stereo playback as well. So no difference across all of these features. And a lot of these of this power really comes from the FPGA core, which also gives you exceptional audio quality because of the low latency, because of the processing quality of our processing technology. And we'll talk a little bit more about this later. But at the same time, it's extremely easy to use. So it doesn't need a lot of the advanced training that an open architecture platform might sometimes require. And talking about processing, there is also the processing expansion module available, as I mentioned, for echo cancelling applications. This sits inside the AHM-64-32, so it doesn't preclude the use of the I/O port for DANTE or other solutions. This module gives you 12 channels of echo cancelling, with each channel having 150 milliseconds of echo cancellation, as well as residual echo cancelling and nonlinear processing for your background noise reduction and automatic gain control for the far end. It's a feature-packed module. And if you ask me a couple of years ago, I would never have guessed the amount of hours I now spend on Teams calls or Zoom meetings. And sure, you can say, well, actually, all of these apps already do a pretty good job at cloud processing our speech, our voice. So, for example, removing the background noise or echo from this room. But there are many situations where hardware AC echo cancelling is still the best option. And it typically boils down to 2 or 3 factors. One is very simply the size of the room. If you're in a very large conference hall, then the built-in cloud processing echo cancelling might not be enough to cancel very long echoes. If you need sound reinforcement or voice reinforcement in the local room, as well as sending your signal away to the far end, to the receiver, then again, a hardware solution might be best because of the low latency in processing the sound reinforcement output. And finally, if you have multiple microphones, so if you're using multiple microphones in a room, having a hardware AC that you can insert on every individual microphone input means that every microphone impulse response from the room and the echo pattern in the room into that specific microphone is calculated, as opposed to an average of all the inputs. Right, so just to have a brief look at the 3 models again and how they compare in terms of size of the matrix and number of I/O, you can see on this table you have some of the key features and how they differ across the 3 models, down to things like the automatic mic mixers, so how many of them are available, 4 of them in AHM-32 and a single one in the AHM-16, and the number of IP controllers you can connect to each model, or the number of user profiles that you can configure for each model, for example, with the custom control app. And all of the 3 models, AHM-16, 32, and 64, they all come with a manufacturer 3-year warranty out of the box by default. Cool. So what I'll do now is I'd like to give you a very quick demo of System Manager. Not in great detail. We have done webinars before. We have lots of videos and webinar recordings online if you want to dig deeper into System Manager. And there's an excellent series of training videos as well available on our website that my colleague Val put together. But very quickly, let's have a look at System Manager, this time within AHM-16. You might notice that I'm running a beta version of System Manager 1.2 that will support the AHM-16 and 32, as well as introducing some new features, which I will not cover today, but things like email notification for errors and logs and a lot more. So let's connect to my AHM-16 unit. So I'll click on the AHM-16. There's no password set in this case, so I'll just go ahead. And you can see that now I can go into my channels screen. That's my input channels for the AHM-16. And this is also to give you just an example of how you can maximize a single 16x16 matrix processor to cater for significant installations, not necessarily a single room only. So you can see I have a bunch of microphone inputs, some handled microphones, perhaps coming from DANTE, from Shaw receivers, for example, and then a bunch of stereo sources for music playback. And if I move to my zones, and again, you can see that all the information is presented in this horizontal signal flow type of display, which makes it incredibly easy to see what processing is active on which channels, what is going on. Some of these channels are assigned to AMM number 1. You can see here for my microphone channels, their levels, So it's an incredibly intuitive way of presenting the information, and you can obviously click on any of these blocks to go into the details of that processing block. Same story for my zone output. So you can see I'm feeding my inputs to our meeting room and other like hospitality areas, lobby, lounge, pool, bar, restaurant, and maybe some theater areas as well, a main hall, foyer, stage, balcony. On some of these, you can see I set up a source selector, which means that you can simply switch between different background music sources in a very quick way with crossfades as well. Priority inputs, for example, for a jukebox input in the lounge area. You can also see that you have all of this processing available down to automatic noise compensation, as we said. So on some of these zones, I activated the ANC, and the speaker processing options as well down here. So that's where you can set up all of your crossover filters and PQ and so on for each crossover output. That's also why if you count the number of zones in this configuration, you will see that we get up to 12 and no more. So there's 10 mono and 1 stereo zone. And that's why I decided as the installer, as the integrator, to reserve some processing outputs for my speaker processing. But you can configure all of that. So you can have 16 zones with no speaker processing, or you can have only say 8 or some 6 zones and a bunch of processing channels dedicated for your crossovers and speaker processing. Now, what's new with the AHM-16 and 32, of course, is the front panel controls. So let's have a quick look at how you would configure those controls and how you would operate them. So into my configure menu, you can see now we have an option to configure the front panel controls. And in this case, on top of things like the brightness of the screen and the keys, I have my 4 soft keys for the AHM-16. And for these, I've assigned some functions on the right just for the purpose of this demo. So some preset selection, source selection. I can also open the simulation. So this will give you a pretty good idea of what's going on the real unit that I have here in the studio. So for example, if I press soft key number 1, that's level control for a zone output, the meeting room, and I can use the arrow keys up and down to control the level. The meter is also displayed there. Number 2, preset selection, so I can change the configuration of the same room from a video call to an audio call or presentation, private mode. Number 3 is a source selection. Again, I can change sources, background music sources for that zone. And number 4 is a simple mute control of the room output. So again, lots of options. And when the LCD screen is not in use, you can also toggle through some diagnostic screens, which will tell you the firmware version and things like the IP setting for the unit. Very useful if you forgot the IP address for the unit before you want to log into it. Diagnostics, so temperature, and so on. Fantastic. So let's go back to our presentation briefly, because I have a little bit more to tell you before we go on to your questions. So to start with, now that we talked about the 3 matrix processors, let's have a quick look at the ecosystem around them. So all of the accessories that you can use in and around an AHM system when building an audio system. So for example, all the control options on the left, including third-party drivers and so on, and all of the audio expansion options on the right. So focusing on audio expansion just for a minute, as we said, you can fit a DANTE card that will give you access to DANTE connections to third-party gear, but also the DT16-8, DT16-4W expanders from Allen & Heath with remote control the preamps from within AHM System Manager, and also to the smaller DANTE interfaces and expanders that we will bring to market this year. So the 2-in, 2-out, and 2x2 interfaces. Or you can opt for the Slink card, which will give you access to the layer 2 plug and play protocols from Allen & Heath, so DX, DSnake, GigaAs, where you can go straight into an expander, maybe daisy chain to a second one, or if you want multiple I/O points distributed around the building, then you can deploy something like a DX hub and branch out to multiple rooms or locations using individual Cat5 lines. So lots of inputs and outputs. And again, some of you might think, well, how do I make use of all of these I/O when I have only a 16 by 16 or 32 by 32 matrix? As I said at the start of the webinar, on top of that processing matrix, you can still patch any system input to any system output freely without taking any of your 16 or 32 processing channels. Right, switching over to control, AHM matrix processors are very well integrated, not only with our control options, so GPIO interfaces that you can freely put on your TCP/IP network, the IP remote controllers, so you can see the IP1 here in the US version, but we also have a European version available. Both can come in black or white, and that's a single rotary control and LCD display. We also have the IP6 with 6 rotary controllers, the IP8 with 8 faders, motorized faders. All of them are PoE powered, so powered over Ethernet, and they can run on standard control networks. But on top of that, we also have a TCP/IP protocol available for free if you want to implement any third-party control system with the AHM. And we also make some drivers available for free for Crestron, AMX, and Extron control systems as a starting point for your projects. You can use any of those. Very good. And on top of all of that, we also have our custom control app, which is our own customizable control interface where you can build multiple user interface for different users in a venue or in a building, and also for different device types. So the same user can have a very simple controls on an iPhone, and then more comprehensive controls when you log in with the same username, but using a laptop or a tablet instead. Custom control is really bring your own device friendly, which means that it doesn't rely on the user interface being installed on the user device. The user interface lives in the AHM matrix processor in this case. So it's uploaded to the matrix processor by the editor software, and by after that, it's deployed instantly on demand when the user logs in with the free app of the custom control app that you can download from the App Store or Google Play Store. And it's cross-platform, so Android, iOS, Mac, Windows, we cater for all of those operating systems. So again, I'll switch very briefly to custom control just to give you a very quick idea of how you would go about using it. Again, we have done lots of webinars in the past, and there are videos online if you want to explore custom control a little bit more. I'll just launch the editor for a few seconds just to show you where you can create a new configuration with a new user interface layout, this white box on the screen. I can create multiple of these in the same config, and then give each one specific attributes. So for example, I might want layout to be in use only for a specific user name, user profile, or for a specific device type, or even for a specific orientation, so that if I turn my tablet in portrait mode, I will get access to extra features or other features. I can double click on this layout or interface and start dragging control items into it. So from a rotary control, a fader, or very simply a button. And then on the right, you can see that you can select which product you want to control, AHM in this case, and which function. So is it a mute? Is it a preset recall? What do you want to do with this button? So in a matter of minutes, you can come up with your own custom interface. And just to give you, again, a very quick example, if I launch the app version of custom control, so what the user would be running on their device, and log into my AHM16 with the admin user in this case, you can see just an example of how a user interface might look like for the control of a meeting room with a mute button and some preset recalls. And also I can switch across different tabs for control of other areas with level control buttons and a source selection for different sources in the different areas, including my restaurant, bar, and so on. So as I said, that was just to give you a very brief overview of custom control. And back to our presentation for one final slide, I promise, and then we'll start taking your questions. And all I want to say is to sum up this AHM introduction is to list some of the reasons why AHM might save you as an installer, as an integrator, both time and money, and why. So starting with the wide ecosystem of control expansion options that we mentioned, and that really means that you don't need to waste time sourcing, configuring third-party gear or shopping for compatible options or for other gear that you want to add to the system. Another very good feature of the AHM system is automatic firmware matching, which means that when you download a new version of the AHM System Manager that comes already with the firmware files for not only your AHM processor included in the bundle, but also as you update your processor, it will also update all of the DX expanders and IP controllers connected on the same network instantly. So you don't need to run around the building with a serial cable connected to your laptop and update manually all of your wall plate controllers, also, no hidden costs. So we don't charge for custom control. We don't charge for AHM System Manager. They're all free. You can download them today and start playing with the software. And we don't charge for extra licenses or fees. As I said before, there's no compromises in the architecture of the system, meaning that you can run all of the processing on all of the channels all of the time without running out of resources. If you have played with open architecture DSP platforms in the past, and I certainly have, you know that it's pretty easy as you start adding your processing, graphic equalizers, and so on to run out of DSP power. And that's not something that will ever happen with AHM. Also, they are incredibly easy to learn. As you can see from the interface, anyone with some basic knowledge of audio can log into a unit and start configuring it, which is not something you can say for every other open architecture system out there. And so they can really be a new go-to solution for a lot of integrators out there. If you invest a little bit of time familiarizing yourself with the system, I'm sure that it can cater for many of your projects to come. Very good. So a couple of application examples. So these ones, you'll find them also on the website. So again, I'm not gonna spend too much time on these, but just to show AHM16 with the custom control app running and a couple of IP1 controllers, wall plate controllers, and some inputs and outputs. And a slightly larger idea here with an AHM32 in a theater space. So the 32 would be catering for all of the audio distribution duties around the building, but perhaps sharing the same DANTE stage boxes and accessories with an SQ or an Avantis mixer sitting front of house in the main hall. So yeah, I hope that was a good example of how you could put together a system with AHM. Now, hopefully Val is still here with me.
I certainly am. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. Now is a great time if you have any questions to pop them into the Q&A box that you will find at the bottom of your Zoom software. We do have some questions coming in, which are good. I mean, you've covered a lot of the initial information over your presentation, so thanks for that. So some questions. Johannes wants to know if there's any feedback suppression available on AHM at this point.
Very good question. The answer is no at this point, but it's definitely something that is very high on our list of features to develop, and something that we have started researching already a couple of years ago in our DSP department, and I'm pretty sure that you will see some new feedback suppression tools in AHM, certainly in the next year or so.
Thanks, Nick. Craig had a question that you actually covered just after he asked the question, but maybe we can just cover it again to make sure it's clear. With the use of 3 or 4 or multiple ways of speaker processing with AHM16 or 32 or 64 for that matter, reduce the number of output buses available. So there's a stereo 3-way processor, use 3 or 6 output buses. How does that work?
Yeah, that is correct. So essentially you have 16, let's take the AHM16 as an example. You would have 16 processing outputs, and of those 16, you can choose in the configuration in System Manager how many are zone outputs, mono or stereo, and how many of those you want to use instead for speaker processing duties. So that will take from your number of zones. And again, with the AHM64, same story, you have 64 of those available, and you can reserve them for zone or speaker processing as you please.
That's great, thank you. A slightly off topic, but I just want to address Hernando's question about who is the best representative or importer looking after integrators for training certification in Colombia, whether it's for Colombia or for any other country for that matter. If you go onto the Alan Heath website, there's a tab at the top, in the top menu, that is where to buy, and in that menu you see a list of all the countries where the distributors are available. So if you click on Colombia, for example, it will bring up Soda Music in Colombia, who will be the best people to speak to. With that being said, regarding AHM, there is a series of online training that includes certification with an online test that you can follow if you want to know more, or if you require a manufacturer certification, that's available too. So most of the information that you need in regards to distribution will be on the website. A question from John, who wants to know if AHM has the same behavior as other mixers from Alan Heath, like SQ, for example, where you cannot mix AR and DX boxes, for example, if you're using them connected to S-Link. Is that still the case?
That is still the case, yes. So the S-Link port is clever enough to understand what type of box you're connecting on the other side, so to switch automatically to either 48 kilohertz or 96 kilohertz, but you cannot mix and match sample rates within the same S-Link connection. So you have to stay with the AR, AB, 48 kilohertz boxes, or have the whole system at 96 kilohertz.
Cool, thanks. Lots of good questions coming in. John, the same John had a follow-up question. Was we talk about internal stereo audio playback in an application such as his in a museum? Can we schedule to trigger audio file playback at specific times, for example?
Yes, you certainly can. You can use the event scheduler for that purpose. And one of the functions of the event scheduler is to start the playback of a specific track at a given time or a day in the week. So that's definitely possible.
Fantastic, thank you. Now to more pressing questions, let's say. First question is, when will System Manager software become available for people to start looking at and playing with ahead of availability? And obviously the follow-up question is, what is the timeline looking like for AHM to be available
right,
worldwide?
So yes, so in terms of System Manager, I don't want to give an exact date because it always depends on our software test program, and we only release software when it's ready and when we're happy that it's stable and as bug-free as possible. I think in the next few weeks, a couple of months, we'll certainly see the new version of System Manager. But don't forget the System Manager 1.1 is already available on the website, and you can download it for free. And that gives you access to all of the processing tools and preset management, and gives you a very good idea of how the system works. In terms of the availability of the new products, I'm sure you're all aware of the problems with component shortages and supply issues and shipping problems globally. And all of these have affected certainly the products in production now, so our existing mixer lines, but more so any new project because of the difficulties in scheduling mass production with our outsourced suppliers. So that's to say that as much as we wanted to have AHM16 and 32 available now, I'm afraid that you're not going to see units in any good volume until May, at least this year, so May 2022.
Great, thank you very much. I mean, there's quite a few questions regarding availability, and I think that covers most of it, as well as questions around price points. And I think the best people to speak to regarding pricing is your local distributor in your territory, who will be able to give you information on that front fairly shortly. So even regarding availability, from a few weeks from now, your distributors will be the best people to speak to. A couple more technical questions. Any plans to implement control over third-party devices over IP commands?
That's a very good question. Yes, so there is already some facility for that. Essentially, you can set something like a preset recall, or even a soft key in the AHM system can trigger a TCP/IP or a UDP command and send it to an external device, to a specific IP address. And that's very useful. You can put in strings in hex or decimal or an ASCII string. And so if you know the specs of the protocol, the control protocol of the receiving device, it's very useful to do things like switching source of a projector or a TV screen from across different sources, or on or off of other devices. And again, the ambition is not really to replace a full-blown control system or a dedicated control system, but in a lot of applications that can save you the money where you don't need a dedicated control system. A perfect example is an integrator in the US who is already speccing AHM16 and 32 for projects coming this year. And straight away, when he saw the concept, he said, well, in 90% of my installs, it means that I don't need a dedicated control system. I can do everything I need from the AHM itself.
Cool, thanks, Nick. So a question on that kind of topic, what the maximum delay value for outputs is that you can be used? Is it the same as on AHM64?
It is the same, so 680 milliseconds from memory on inputs and outputs, and an additional 680 if you then go through speaker processing, so quite a lot of delay available.
So that gives you a couple of hundred, well, multiple times 200 meters to play with if you need to. So that should cover some fairly large events if you're using it for delay towers, for example. Another technical question, and again, in regards of technical stuff, it's quite easy to have a look at some of our AHM webinars that we've had in the past, or to jump on the training videos, because it covers basically all of the processing available in AHM if you want to look at some of those things in more detail on your own time. Manuel has a question. Is it possible to assign DANTE outputs beside the 16 outputs? And I guess he's talking about being able to double patch outputs, both analog on DANTE, I think.
Yeah, that is certainly possible. So all of the 64 by 64 DANTE channels from the IO port will be available in the patch system. So any zone output or direct out from a channel, anything you want to patch can go to any of those 64 outputs without any limitation.
Cool. And a nice follow-up question regarding IP controllers from Mike. Is there any kind of resource monitor to know when the unit DSP is running low? Which is, I like the question because it's a loaded and at the same time very simple answer.
The answer is no, because you don't need one, because there is no risk of running low on DSP. As I said, all of the processing is there on all of the channels, and it's always there all of the time. So you don't need to borrow resources from a DSP pool. All of that, all of those resources are built into the design of the products from from day one. So whether or not they're active or they're switched on or off, it doesn't really matter. So no risk of running out of DSP.
Cool, thanks. And then another question, I think we're getting towards the end of it, but it's been some very solid questions. If we're using the ambient noise compensation, do we need an external reference mic to measure the noise floor, basically?
Yes, yeah, you will need a reference mic. That is the essentially how an ANC works, by having a microphone within the same space that you can use for measuring the noise floor. And again, as Val said, you can watch Val's video on ANC, part of the training series, and that will give you a bit more background on how it works.
Great, thank you. And a final question from Daniel, who wants to just confirm the number of IP controllers that you can use on 16 and 32 relative to 64. There's a slight difference in limitations and how many you can use. Yeah, there is a difference, and you're right. It's up to 8 IP1 controllers for an AHM16. And that's really because of the different size of the matrix and the software, and I think it sits nicely on when you look at the typical applications for each model as well. So of course, with the AHM64, you can do very large buildings and a campus with 64 IP1s. That's a lot less likely with an AHM16. Great, thanks. I think that brings us almost to the final questions. The last question is for some of the AHM64 users that might be currently using the system, if there's any updates coming in the pipeline, and what maybe if there are things that they can expect to see specifically. Yes, so the next version, which is what will be supporting the new matrix processors, will also come with some new features. I did mention email notification, which is a new one. There's more to it, but I don't want to commit to any specific feature just yet. It's going through our software test program, and as soon as we have it available, I'm sure that we'll do a webinar or a live stream just dedicated to the new version of System Manager. Okay, well, that looks like it's all the questions, so I'll hand it back over to you. Thanks, everyone. Nice to see you. Thank you very much, Val, for your help. And thank you everyone else for joining us today and for spending the time with us looking at these new products. If you have any further questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to your distribution partners, our distribution partners, or to ourselves, our support channels. You know where to find us. So please reach out to us. We're always happy to talk products and applications with all of you. Thanks again and goodbye.